Thank you for coming today. I know that there are some members in the audience that know a whole lot more about the Mine Run campaign than we'll have a chance to cover today. And I also imagine there are probably some in the audience whose focus on their interest in Orange County is outside of the Civil War. So I'll try to do some things that will hopefully touch on both those kind of extremes of interest. And we'll start off by putting the battle into some degree of context. The American Civil War, largely thought of as lasting just 4 days short of 4 years. And so where does that place the Mine Run campaign that you see highlighted in red from November 26th to December 2nd of 1863? So that puts it about 2.5 years into the 4-year Civil War, with another year and a half left after that. Now, how does it relate to some of the other more prominent battlefields in the area? Well, Fredericksburg in blue was fought 1 year before in December of 1862. The Battle of Chancellorsville, that's the battle that was fought 12 miles west of Fredericksburg. That's about 7 months before this action at Mine Run. And then the Battle of Gettysburg, most famous battle of the war, is some 5 months or so before. So you can see by the time we get to the Mine Run campaign, these soldiers and officers have been engaged in quite a bit prior to that. And then the first of the major battles fought immediately after Mine Run is going to be May of 1864 with the Battle of the Wilderness. So with that as a little bit of context, let's take a look at the Mine Run campaign in the respect of how well it's known. And it's one of the more obscure battles of the Civil War, campaigns of the Civil War. And I want to suggest that there's something kind of missing from it. And to further emphasize that, I'd like to take a look at 3 articles or books about the period and see what they have to say. An article that came out at about the sesquicentennial, or the centennial of the Civil War in Civil War Times Illustrated, called it the campaign that history forgot. So again, suggests something's kind of missing. One of the books on the Mine Run campaign is called A Campaign of Lost Opportunities. So again, kind of suggests what's missing. Some opportunities were missed. And a book that I highly recommend that has come out rather recently by Chris Makowski calls this campaign the Great Battle Never Fought. So again, suggesting one of the things that's missing. And if we put all those things together, and I can make a sentence that kind of describes the campaign to say that the Mine Run campaign has largely been forgotten, essentially because the Federal Army failed to take advantage of their opportunities. And as a result, there was no great battle fought in the Mine Run campaign. So what I'd like to do today is to really focus on what were some of those missed opportunities that second book kind of highlights. And in addition to that, while there were some missed opportunities, one of the other more prominent aspects of this battle is that the Federal Army commander, George Gordon Meade, realized that after the last opportunity was missed, that he should give up the campaign and turn around and retreat, rather than continue to try to see if there was actually some degree of success they might obtain. And bring that out, you might say, well, doesn't that sound kind of logical? If you don't have an opportunity, you may not attack. Well, the first battle that I had mentioned, the Battle of Fredericksburg, this is the Army commander from that. So just 1 year earlier, Ambrose Burnside felt that his opportunities, after attempting several different things in Fredericksburg, had passed. But he was under a lot of pressure because President Lincoln had already announced there was going to be an Emancipation Proclamation come out on January 1st. So this battle in December, just before that, he knew that he needed to try something. And the resulting Battle of Fredericksburg is arguably the worst Federal defeat of the entire war. So sometimes battles and actions take place when the opportunity has seemed to pass. So, but George Gordon Meade is arguably the most important character of the Mine Run campaign. So, just a little bit about him. Even though his family is from Pennsylvania, he was literally born in Spain. He went to West Point and had 25 years of experience in the United States military before the Civil War broke out. And graduating very high in his class, he became a topographical engineer. He was recognized in the Mexican War campaign for his talents. And at a time when you had to have either a superior retire or become a casualty or get promoted before you could get promoted, they had something that they called brevets. It's kind of an honorary rank. You do something that is noteworthy, they will give you a rank even though you don't have a slot open for that. So he was honorarily given a higher rank in the Mexican War. In the Battle of Fredericksburg, that I mentioned was a disaster, he was actually the most successful general and did actually break through part of the Confederate line. He wasn't very heavily engaged at Chancellorsville, but he's well noted for, at the end of the battle, for arguing that the Army should stay and fight. And Abraham Lincoln learned of that and was very impressed with the aggressive nature of this man. And so 3 days before the Battle of Gettysburg, he became the Army commander and would be the victor of the most famous battle of the Civil War. However, as you look at a scene of the Gettysburg battlefield there, in the immediate aftermath, it was felt by Abraham Lincoln that Meade had an opportunity to destroy the Confederate Army as it got to the Potomac River and found that the river was at a high level and couldn't readily be crossed. So here, the man that wins the greatest victory of the greatest is the victor of the greatest battle of the war, finds himself under criticism from Lincoln. And Robert E. Lee himself would feel that the Union Army was in awful shape following the Battle of Gettysburg. One of the things that he would say was, we did whip them at Gettysburg, and it will be seen for the next 6 months that that army, meaning Meade's Union Army, will be as quiet as a sucking dove. So feeling that the Union Army has been badly battered in the Gettysburg campaign, there is a decision made by the Confederates to take some of Robert E. Lee's army and send them to an army further to the west, specifically a man named Braxton Bragg, operating in Tennessee and in northern Georgia, would be the recipient of 13,000 men from Lee's army, commanded by this man, James Longstreet. And the largest Confederate victory west of the Allegheny Mountains was in mid-September of 1863, called the Battle of Chickamauga. And in the aftermath of that, the Union Army fell into Chattanooga, Tennessee, and was under siege. So Lincoln, in the aftermath and during this time span, is once more frustrated by George Gordon Meade. Word came that a portion of Lee's army had been sent west, and they turned to Meade and said, I want you to verify that. And he had difficulty sending out patrols and learning exactly what had happened. And then when it became confirmed that a portion of Lee's army was gone, Lincoln is also frustrated that Meade doesn't act aggressive now that he has a more distinct advantage in numbers over Lee than he did before Longstreet left. So Lincoln will end up deciding to take some troops away from Meade and sending them over to Chattanooga, Tennessee to lift the siege. So 20,000 men under the man who commanded the army right before George Gordon Meade, this guy, Joseph Hooker, will go out there and they will be victorious in lifting the siege of Chattanooga, which was on November 23rd through 25th. I've got that in bold. You remember that our Mine Run campaign gets underway on the 26th. So there's also good news coming in from the West at this point, which helps to raise morale, but it also puts a little bit more pressure on Meade for him to do something likewise. So even though George Gordon Meade did not act aggressively when Lee's army was weakened and Longstreet was sent west, Lee does get aggressive as soon as Joseph Hooker takes those 20,000 men. And so the very next campaign, just before our Mine Run campaign, is called the Bristow Campaign, from October 9th to November 9th. Again, our campaign gets started November 26th for Mine Run. Lee's got around 55,000 soldiers. Meade has around 80,000 soldiers. And we'll be taking a look at this map quite a few times. But at the start of this, the Confederate Army is here in orange. The Union Army is in Culpeper County here. And Robert E. Lee with his army is going to try to swing first to the west and then to the north of the Union Army. And as the Union Army decided to retreat up the railroad line of the Orange and Alexandria, there will be a battle called Bristow Station on October 14th. And I think that's right here on your map. So this Battle of Bristow Station is a small Union victory. And one of the officers that is engaged in that battle is another person that will be extremely important for our Mine Run campaign. His name is Gouverneur K. Warren. He's also a West Point graduate. He graduated high in his class, so he also went into the engineers. Early in the war, he had some combat assignments, but he eventually became the chief engineer of the Army, a staff position, and would hold that during the Battle of Gettysburg, and is responsible for saving a position called Little Round Top on the end of the Union line. So he gets a whole lot of credit for that. Army Commander George Gordon Meade is impressed with him and will reward him by promoting him to a position called the Corps. Now, an army is made up of corps. For the Mine Run campaign, the Union Army will have 5. But he is gone. He's kind of skipped over a level. Basically, for generals, you might command in 1,500 men at the lowest level. And then there's a position where you command around 6,000 men. And then there's a position where you command around 20,000 men. Well, he's jumped from having experience commanding 1,500 to now commanding roughly 20,000. And at this phase of the war, you rarely see this. Early in the war, a whole lot of people that hadn't had experience commanding high numbers of men would get assigned because nobody had experience commanding large number. But at this phase of the war, that is incredible. And in his first real battle as a corps commander, he will be at Bristow Station and does very, very well. Well, in the aftermath of Bristow Station now, again, Confederates will decide they don't want to stay up there with their long supply line, so they will eventually fall back to this area, and the other significant battle will be on November 9th in kind of this vicinity. It is called the Battle of Rappahannock Station. Its title is there at the top on November 7th. This is one of the heroes of the Battle of Rappahannock Station. His name is David Russell. He is wounded in that battle and is promoted for his service there. But he is also going to be sent in the aftermath up to Washington, D.C. They captured, I believe, 7 battle flags, and that is a great honor. Battle flags are very highly thought of in the Civil War. If you saw your flag go forward, you went forward. If it pulled back, you could honorably withdraw. And you're going to fight for that to the bitter end. So capturing battle flags meant that you did something very brave. So he is sent up to Washington, D.C. with these battle flags to present them to the War Department. Well, Edwin Stanton is the Secretary of War, and as one staff member would say, that after Russell waited an entire day, he was basically told that um, the Secretary of War was too busy to meet with him, and so he took the battle flags, dropped them off at the War Department, and then decided to start to go back to the Army. So what message is Stanton kind of sending to Meade when he's trying to turn in his trophies of a small battle and snubs him? So is Meade motivated, encouraged by his successes at Bristow Station and Rappahannock Station? Is he goaded by the Secretary of War and wanting to, to make up for that snub? But at any rate, now comes our campaign. So there's our background to the Mine Run campaign. So Meade is going to initiate this one, unlike Lee initiating the Bristow Station campaign. Again, our dates, November 26th to December 2nd. Lee at this time has around 45,000 men in his army, and Meade has around 70,000. Now, this is the same map that we looked at in the Bristow Station campaign, and the armies are going to end up being right back where they started the Bristow campaign from. So the Union Army in Culpeper County, the Confederates here in Orange County, and our next map is going to be a detail of this area right here as we set up our Mine Run campaign. So once more, here we are for the Confederate Army here in Orange County, Confederate Union Army in Culpeper County. Just to the east of us here, well, I should say to the north between them is the Rapidan River flowing between the respective armies. And here, one of the main tributaries, well, not a main tributary, but for our purposes, our most important body of water is Mine Run. So here it is east of Orange, flowing up into the Rapidan. And the maneuvers that the Union Army are going to start making to get across the river are going to be in the vicinity of where you see the word wilderness on the map. So let's take a look here now. So once more to get oriented to this map, here is the Rapidan River, again, the barrier between the respective armies. Here is the Mine Run stream, and it's to the east of the stream that the Union Army will try to cross at three different places. Jacobs Ford here, which is inaccessible by road today. Germanna Ford here, which Route 3 crosses over right near the Germanna Community College. So this is a ford most of you should be aware of. And then at the Culpeper Mine Ford, this is another one where no road access takes you to the river today. If you have three different rivers, you should be able to get across the rivers rather rapidly, much more quickly than if you all lined up and waited your turn to get across one. So the Union Army is hoping to get across here very rapidly and get into good position to fight before the Confederates can react. So this is an image at Germanna Ford. It is to get you, again, oriented to the scene. The foreground that you see here, these are people in Culpeper County. The other side of the stream over here, this is Orange County. Over on the right, you can see some of the bridge abutments from the Civil War era bridge that had been destroyed earlier in the war. As you work on down this direction, right here you can see some Union troops wading the river, and off on the far left here, you can see a pontoon bridge that is built, or being built. Now, pontoon bridges are kind of prefab bridges. You got these boats that you're going to put in the river. There's already a stringer that's been cut at a certain length and planking that's going to get lashed down. And engineers had come to the river at all three of the crossing points to try to see how many bridges they would need. Well, there was a rain that came between the time the engineers visited and the time the Army comes to the river. What happens to, I heard someone say, oops, yes. What happens when you get rain? Well, the river rises, but it also gets wider. So you may wonder as you look at that image, why are those soldiers wading across the river on what is November 26th when the water is cold, when they should have an opportunity to just wait till the bridge is built? Well, when the engineers built the bridge, they found themselves one span too short at Germanna Ford as well as at Jacobs Ford. So 2 of the 3 crossings, there are delays while the engineers scour the countryside to take apart buildings and go build a trestle at the end. So part of our problem here, this is the same image but a different title at the top. Missed opportunity is number 1, is that the Union Army is slowed down. The degree of their element of surprise is lost because of their trouble in building the bridges to get across the river. The next, let's look at the next kind of lost opportunity. And for that, it's important to know that the plan of the Union Army is to consolidate their forces around the area of Robinson's Tavern. The image that you see right here, these soldiers in the road are marching to the west. This is the Orange Turnpike, or today's modern Route 20. So Fredericksburg would be kind of behind them. Orange is ahead of them. At the ridge right here in this area where you see the cannon, today there is a traffic light at this intersection. The area just here to the right is known as the Locust Grove Town Center. The place where this building stands, which is Robinson's Tavern, is kind of where the Exxon sign is right now at that intersection. Robinson's Tavern at the time was actually had 2 buildings joining one another, built in different phases. You can see kind of further away to the west is a taller, and my understanding is that's the older of the buildings. And then there's a smaller building here just to the right. And that smaller building actually still exists. This is what it looked like in the 1940s. And that building, because of the Locust Grove Town Center going in, was picked up and sits behind the convenience store with the Exxon station. So if you go to that intersection and go to the north, the very first building you see to the right is this structure as it's been moved. Now, the Union Army, I guess, could not understand the accents of some of the local folks. And when they said Robinson's Tavern, they thought they were saying Robertson's Tavern. So you're going to see on some of the maps and a lot of the Union accounts, Robert instead of Robin. But this is an area where the Union Army wanted to concentrate, and we'll see that they wanted to spread out to the north and the south of this point. And interestingly, the Confederates also realized this ridge was a great place for them to concentrate. So Robinson's Tavern is going to be kind of our next focus. Before we delve into that more, let's take a look at a couple of other people we need to know a little bit about to understand the problems with the concentration at Robinson's Tavern. This is William French. He's one of those 5 corps commanders. You can see he's also a West Point graduate with a fair amount of experience. One of the interesting things about his pre-war experience, he was Jackson's superior in Florida. Stonewall Jackson felt that this man French spent a bit too much time inside of his quarters with his maid. French said that maid was their nanny. They thought of her like a family, and he actually had a pretty good, I've seen his defense of the situation too, and he's very insulted by the fact that Jackson would suggest this towards someone that he cares a great deal about. In the Civil War, he launched the initial attack against the stone wall at Fredericksburg. He fought at Chancellorsville. Again, here at Mine Run, he's got one of the 5 corps, and there are lots of allegations of him being drunk on November 27th as he's trying to work his way to the Robinson's Tavern. I should say there is one general who said he communicated with French multiple times on that day and found him not to be drunk, and he put that in a newspaper article. But there are allegations of that. So he's one person that's important to know. And another person is called Henry Prince, also a West Pointer. In the Mexican War, he was severely wounded in the Battle of Molino del Rey. And he would spend close to 2 years recovering from that wound before he came back. And it would trouble him for the rest of his life. We don't know if it troubled him on the day at Mine Run. He would be captured at the Battle of Cedar Mountain the previous year from Mine Run, again, as another nearby battle. But here at Mine Run, he is a subordinate of French, commanding what's called the division, roughly 5,000 men or so. And again, his pain, as I mentioned, would bother him throughout his life. He would lose his life in 1892 in London, committing suicide, and he left a note indicating pain to an intolerable degree. And some wonder, was he experiencing a great deal of pain in the Mine Run campaign that affected his ability to function? We don't know, but something that's been kind of floated out there. So now that we've kind of looking at Robinson's Tavern and some of the main characters, let's look at the effort to concentrate the forces. In this particular map, Robinson's Tavern is right here. The river crossings, here is, there's Jacob's Ford here, here's Germanna Ford here, and over here is the Culpeper Mine Ford. So the troops that came directly to Robinson's Tavern crossed at Germanna, went down like this, and Gouverneur K. Warren, the man that was successful at Bristow Station, he's in command here with one corps, and he's expecting 2 corps to come down from this direction to form up on his right in the area of the Widow Morris farm. We'll talk a lot more about that in just a moment. And then there are some other forces that came across at the Culpeper Mine Ford that will go on the Orange Plank Road. They will go past Parker's store right here. Now that is where Miller's Farm is today for a modern landmark. And they would work their way on down to New Hope Church in this area to hopefully, again, connect all 5 of those corps online kind of through here. Well, as we already mentioned, Warren will get to Locust Grove. He will get there first. And almost as soon as he gets there, Confederates who also want to concentrate on that ridge are confronting him. For the action that's down here along the Orange Plank Road, it gets started a little bit slow. There is going to be a Confederate cavalry raid that hits a supply line and tears up some wagons and destroys some supplies and stuff. There will be an action right around the church itself, small scale action. The most interesting element of this, however, is there will be a Massachusetts cavalryman named Charles Longfellow who will be severely wounded. His father is America's poet, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And with this, again, being a December battle, what major holiday is coming but Christmas? And Wadsworth will, in Christmas of 1863, write his poem that has later been put to music and is I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. You may remember in one of the lyrics in there, it says, hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. When he talks about hate being strong, he's making a direct reference to the Civil War, where hate is strong in our country. And there are other references to the war as well. But things go relatively well with the Union forces coming up to the south. But for the Union forces coming up from the north, they are going to have some difficulties. And French will stop at that Morris's farm and will send this message at 9:20 in the morning to the chief of staff of the army, saying the head of my column is near the Plank Road and waiting for General Warren. Well, he's a little confused by several things, but to call something by the wrong road is actually happens a lot in the Civil War. Even though he's a long way from the Orange Plank Road, he's not too terribly far from the Orange Turnpike, which is probably what he meant. But he is sitting somewhere that he thinks is near the turnpike waiting for General Warren. Well, here's what the chief of staff had to say when he got that message. The message is sent at 11:30, so more than 2 hours later, so it takes a while to get. He says, your dispatch of 11:20, or excuse me, of 9:20 is received. What are you waiting for? No orders have been sent to you to wait for General Warren anywhere along your route. Goes on to say, Robinson's Tavern is where you're supposed to be. That is where Warren is right now. Warren is pressed by large numbers of the enemy. You need to get there right away. Well, what is the problem? Well, once more, right up here, I'll have a blow up of this. Here's where Widow Morris intersection is. Again, it's north of the Robinson's Tavern. And my next map is a blow up of that area to discuss it a little bit more. Well, if you're at the Widow Morris intersection right up here, again with Locust Grove and Robinson's Tavern right here, there are two roads that you can take to get there. One, what for them is the left fork, but it's to your right, is this dotted line that would bring him down to slide in just north of Warren's men like that. The other is to come down like this. It's a shorter route. This one right here is shorter, but it intersects with this spot. That's the Raccoon Ford Road, and it's known that Confederates are out at Raccoon Ford. So there's a potential to come in contact with the Confederates if you take the shorter route. Well, what the men of French's command did, and with Prince in the lead, when they got to the Widow Morris intersection, they sent out a reconnaissance. And they found that this road right here was completely clear of any enemy forces, the long route. They found that the short route, they did run into some supposedly Confederate cavalry there. And at about the time of 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's time to make a decision. They can hear some shots fired in the area of Robinson's Tavern. So the thought is we need to get down there as quickly as possible. And they decide to take this particular route, even though their orders were to take this unobstructed but longer route. For why they didn't follow their orders, I don't know, but for some reason they are confused and decide to take that route. Well, because of what has happened here with this delay up around Widow Morris intersection and the fighting we're about to talk about, the Federal Army will fail to concentrate on the second day of the campaign around Robinson's Tavern and not have their army consolidated. So this is a blow up of, again, that area that we looked at before. So as the Union Army comes from the Widow Morris intersection down to here, they make contact with some troops. This is a label for a man named Johnson, who indeed is marching from Raccoon Ford and is going through the intersection right in front of them. Now, to take a little bit of look at his march, we don't have to think about it too much. When a unit moves, how do you distribute the different components? He's got 4 bodies of around 1,500 men that are infantrymen. He's got some artillery or some cannon with him. He's got some ambulances as well. So his marching order, you really want to get those infantrymen to the front as soon as possible. So 3 of his 4 infantry brigades are going to march first. And then once you establish a position, you look to see if there are places where there's open field of fire where you can set up your artillery. So you kind of bring them next. And by that time, there should be some casualties that begin to amount. So you want to have your ambulances and medical staff. And you want to protect your rear. So you want to have one of your infantry brigades coming along in the back. So that's his order of march. And Oh, let me ask, where's the most vulnerable? My slide gives it away, but of that, the most vulnerable that can't defend themselves very well are the ambulances. And that happens to be where the men under French will strike. There's an opportunity there. You can divide the fighting force of General Johnson and attack kind of each one of them at a time. This is what you would love to do, but the Union Army is basically startled by running into anybody other than cavalry, and they do not react quickly and aggressively to this opportunity. Also, that rear guard of Johnson, and here, let me get you oriented to the map. Here's that intersection. So the Union Army is coming down this road from Jacobs Ford, and this area where you see the red, this is the Raccoon Ford Road. So the fighting kind of starts off here, and the men that were the rear guard do an excellent job of hastily getting up to protect the ambulances. By 3:45 in the afternoon, General Johnson thinks he can attack both ends of the army, the federal forces that are in front of him, and as such, he's going to end up, it's not possible for him to hit this side of the army. He doesn't have enough troops to strike the right end of the federal line, but he will take half of his command, so roughly some 3,000 men will line up here to basically face the Federals. And then his troops that were down here are going to make what's called the wheel, this turning movement, and they're going to line up through here. So he's going to have kind of a big V. So I make reference to the V-shaped Confederate position kind of restricts the federal deployment. What the Federal Army really wanted to do was get all their men and line them up off in this direction, but they can't do it. By dusk, Johnson realizes he's facing about twice as many men as he has and decides to withdraw. And this again is known as the Battle of Payne's Farm. So one of the next missed opportunity, the Federal Army failed to take advantage of their superior numbers. They had plenty of troops to completely overwhelm General Johnson, and fortunately because of his V, he kind of prevented that from happening. Well, what are the numbers? Confederates engaged at Payne's Farm under Johnson, about 5,500 men. The Federal soldiers available, and I didn't put engaged is probably 10,000 men, but available, there were 32,000 men on that road. If they could have all gotten up and not gotten bottlenecked there, they could have an opportunity to destroy Johnson before he retreated. And for the casualties, this is some pretty serious fighting. When you lose 10% of your troops, as you can see that Johnson does, that's considered a lot. And the Federal casualties, about 950, that's also about 10% of the roughly 10,000 or so that they had actually engaged. And so what Johnson did in this little action at Payne's Farm, he prevents 2 of the 5 Federal Corps from linking up at Robinson's Tavern, and he's able to escape with his small command before the Union Army can assemble overwhelming odds. Robert E. Lee is very impressed. He said the promptness with which this unexpected attack was met and repulsed reflects great credit on General Johnson again and his men. And what does the Union Army commander have to say? Often you expect somebody to argue the opposite. I messed up. There's a slide that I missed, but Meade is going to blame French, and French will be dismissed from the service. So if you go there today, what you'll find in that area in blue has been purchased by the American Battlefield Trust. There's a nice 2-mile trail there with interpretive markers that I encourage you to take a look at. And the Friends of Wilderness Battlefield, of which I'm on the board, we do staff that on weekends in the summertime to try to help people and answer their questions about going through it. So another thing you can see, and if you want it another time, we can give an entire program just on the Mine Run campaign. Just don't pick a day in which the Redskin Commanders are playing. All right. So What the Confederates are going to do next is going to take their troops that had been engaged here on the first day of the battle or the second day of the campaign and pull them back behind the stream mine run over here. So our next important aspect is as the Union Army examined now this particular position, they believed that the Confederate right was weak. So here's the right end of the line. This is down, kind of anchored along the orange plank road, and then from there runs on up behind the stream, Mine Run, across Route 20, which would be here, and then even further up. But this is a look at the right. There's also an image over here, and I am not positive of this, but to me, as I look at that, I think that this is meant to be the orange plank road over here. And here you can see the Confederate line coming to an end that's even slightly bent back. Once I let you see the full light, can you see how it's bent back just a little bit there? So Confederate right is determined to be weak, and Gouverneur K. Warren, the man that saved Little Round Top, the man that won the Battle of Bristoe Station, goes to Meade and says, I would like to take some force. If you reinforce my corps, I think that I can take this position. Mine Run Stream is not very much of a formidable obstruction there. Here you can see there's basically three little branches of it that will eventually form the main stream. So the water course is not intimidating, and the Confederate position tends to be weak. They think they see an opportunity. Meade is impressed with Warren, and he says that Warren expressed the earnest confidence that Warren expressed of his ability to carry everything before him, and the reliance I placed on that officer's judgment induced me to modify my plan, and that plan was to follow out again what Warren wanted to do. The men would spend their time maneuvering to get in position, but as this staff officer noted, Confederate works were slight and thinly occupied. Success seemed to be within our grasp, and so it would have been, but for one circumstance. The day was nearly spent. So without daylight, they are going to wait to the next day and hope that the position is still weak. Over that night, the temperatures got to be bitterly cold. Here you can see some guys huddled around fires, some with blankets augmenting their overcoats. And one of the things that they kind of concluded is anybody that falls in the battle the next day on this cold temperature, if you're wounded, they might not get to you in time to save your life. So that's one kind of negative factor. The other thing, probably once daylight came and they could see the ground a little bit more, they thought that their chances of success would not be very good. And so one of the unique things about this battle is that some of the men actually in this pre-dog tag era would pin their names on pieces of paper to their jackets. So that morning, now this is a map that the orientation is different from any of the others. North is actually up here to your right. So that line running behind Mine Run for the Confederate line that before had ended on this road, the plank road, is now extending on down and is basically astride the Catharpin Road in the area of St. Just. Warren's men are all lined up here, ready to make an attack on what they think is a weak position. And again, when daylight comes the next day, there's a realization that the Confederates had been busy that night putting troops in front of Warren. So Warren will send a message to Meade saying that his position and strengths, meaning the Confederates, seem so formidable in my present front that I advise against making the attack here. The full light of the sun shows me that I cannot succeed. So the missed opportunity number 5 is the Federals are too late to have an easy job of attacking Confederate right. Meade at first was furious. He said, "My God, General Warren has half my army at his disposal." But he eventually realizes, once he has a chance to examine it, that the opportunity has gone. And unlike some other occasions where attacks would occur, even though there might not be much chance of success, Meade cancels Warren's attack orders. He does spend some time looking around to see if there are other weaknesses. If the area in front of Warren is strong, does that mean that some place else has been weakened? So he looks around, doesn't find an opportunity to succeed anywhere. So he decides to leave and will write to his wife on the last day of the campaign that I would rather be ignominiously dismissed and suffer anything than knowingly and willfully have thousands of brave men slaughtered for nothing. That's obviously in reference to Warren's attack, but also any potential other attack. He's afraid that the Lincoln administration is going to dismiss him for not attempting something in this campaign. What he does next is he proposes, rather than retreat back into Culpeper County and have, again, a river, the Rapidan or else the Rappahannock between him and the enemy, he decides he would like to move to Fredericksburg and spend the winter of 1863-64 there, utilize the supply base at Fredericksburg. But I guess there's a bad taste in the mouth of the administration about doing anything at Fredericksburg. He is told no, and he will write to the General-in-Chief, Henry Halleck, on the same day that he writes his wife, that because of their disapproval, he would have liked to have gone again into a position over there in Fredericksburg rather than recross the river. The chief of staff kind of noted that had Meade done so, and this is with some hindsight, he's writing this after the Battle of the Wilderness, he said, had he done so, the first battle with Lee in May 1864 would not have been fought in the wilderness, but in more open country. And what was the Battle of the Wilderness like? Here again, you look at all the federal casualties from Mine Run, 1,600 men. The federal casualties for that fight in the wilderness, only a few miles down the road, and very similar maneuver, crossing over it, two of the same three fords, wilderness casualties, 17,000, close to 18,000 men, to get into roughly the same position on the same side of the river. So the opportunity number 6 that is missed is, I think, the denial of the change of the supply base, because it meant they're going to have to fight a very bloody battle to basically get to the same ground. So to go where we started off before, the Mine Run campaign has largely been forgotten because the Federal Army failed to take advantage of their opportunities, and I wanted to focus on looking at those opportunities here with you today. And as a result, no great battle was fought in the Mine Run campaign. So thank you. Again, glad to entertain any questions.
Hey, Greg, I've got a question. What do we know about the present state of preservation of Confederate earthworks, steelworks associated with that campaign, with that battle, especially on the Confederate left?
The man that wrote this book, Chris Makowski, made some contacts with someone in Orange County that knew where a lot of the earthworks were. And one day we spent virtually the whole day looking at extant Confederate earthworks. There are some wonderful works that are out there. Some of the people that owned them didn't know what they were, apparently. Do you have any earthworks on your property? No. And so, can I mind if I look around? Oh, you got earthworks right here. Oh, that's what that is. Was kind of the reaction. So there are some wonderful earthworks. As far as the preservation, a lot of them are in good shape, but as far as being set aside and preserved in that respect, none of them, other than the Paynes Farm battlefield, and I didn't mention, but the American Battlefield Trust has also bought some land at the southern end of the battlefield in the vicinity of the New Hope Church battlefield, although there's no parking lots or markers or anything like that down there yet. What is unfortunately no longer extant is anything on the Confederate right. I would love to be able to see the line that Warren looked at and said, I don't want to attack here like I thought. There's really nothing in that area around St. Just that I'm aware of that still exists.
Yeah, overlooking Mountain Run, there's a really, really nice, large artillery chevron, about an 8-gun emplacement. That essentially overlooks Tobacco Stick Ford, Jacobs Ford, and the Stevensburg Road, or at least where the Stevensburg Road crosses the Rapidan.
Are those oriented? Those are oriented toward the Rapidan River to fire into Culpeper. Okay. I know nothing about that area.
And there's also a really, and I found this through examination of the LiDAR imagery for that section of the county.
Mm-hmm.
And in front of Raccoon Ford, Somerville Ford, and progressing farther to the south and west, there's a really long, fairly unbroken single rifle trench that serves to connect a lot of individual artillery emplacements. Most of which cluster around Somerville Ford, but there's one or two farther east and another couple farther to the south and west that, by looking at the LiDAR imagery, it becomes very, very apparent that there's a trench line that connects all of those emplacements. It crosses Mountain Run, goes up onto the next intervening ridge. So yeah, I was really surprised to see such a long trench line that remains, at least intact enough for it to be picked up on LiDAR. And it's not even the really fine-grained LiDAR. It's just the publicly available LiDAR, which has about a 3-foot granularity. So that's why I was wondering, if we knew more comprehensively what the state of preservation on some of those Confederate left earthworks look like.
Yeah, again, best of my knowledge, none of that has been bought by an organization to establish a preservation park. Yeah.
Lee was credited with having a phenomenal topographical eye. And there's no better example of it than what we now call the Rappahannock line. And the Rappahannock version of it was created in the fall and winter of 1862, 63, when of course they had almost 30, almost 40 miles of Rappahannock river crossings that they had positions at. And then the winter of 1863, 64, the Rapidan side of it was about 20 miles of trenches from Mine Run west. And the thinking was that the wilderness in the middle did not need to be defended, and they weren't the men to do it anyway. But it would delay any enemy attempt to get past the Rapidan and the Rappahannock lines and delay until resistance could be brought. And it worked. It actually worked. It wasn't until the Battle of the Wilderness that line was finally turned. But the one thing and Greg, I know you know this, but during that Bristow Station campaign, French and Prince got into it then. Because the November 9 Rappahannock Station defeat was accompanied by a Kelly's Ford defeat. And I think it was French who got after Prince and had already gotten after him for disobeying, he said, disobeying orders and refusing to hold the position. And they got into it again. And then during the Jacobs Floyd crossing and the Widow Morris bivouac, they got into it for a third time. They failed, they didn't want to talk to each other. And they didn't.
Yeah, Phil.
Greg, what role did the unfinished railroad play in changing Warren's mind about whether that position was assailable or not?
I don't. The unfinished railroad passes just to the north of the Catharpin Road, and in the area around St. Just, there are some images of that. I'm not aware of that playing a particular role. I would imagine if you were going to assault, it would be a fairly good avenue to send some troops down that might get protected. But since the attack didn't actually take place, I don't know if there were any plans for. Well, good, Frank.
I found at least one report that Warren saw fresh earthworks in front of him and thought the Confederates had gotten all the way around in front of him and had built earthworks, and that he delayed at least a bit. I mean, this leads to getting there to the Confederate right late in the day. That Warren stopped to investigate and prepared to confront these fresh earthworks, and it turns out it's part of the right-of-way of the railroad that they're working on. It's not a trench at all.
Ah, okay. I hope you all realize that with me giving a talk on Mine Run with Frank Walker in the audience, this is like asking me to talk about the flood with Noah sitting in front of me. Yeah.
I think you've done a fantastic. You put it together real well. I appreciate it.
Let me just, one thing about some earthworks that do exist here at Germanna Ford. You can see there's a bend in the river there. If you go to the campus of the community college, you can see some earthworks that sit back here. Clearly, they're not meant to stop anybody from getting across, but if you do, because of this horseshoe bend, those earthworks were meant to contain a crossing. So of the things that we've discussed here, I've never, even though I've been to Mine Run Ford on a canoe, I've never had an opportunity to walk on the ground here, nor at Jacobs Ford. So I'm not sure what kind of fortifications you find other than what's at Germanna Community College. Yes, sir.
I was wondering, was Jubal early in executing a flanking attack just as Meade withdrew from Mine Run? I read something about that.
Not that I can think of. Jubal Early was in command of half of Robert E. Lee's army here. Richard Stoddard Ewell ordinarily commanded that half, but he is absent from the army at this time, and Jubal Early is commanding it throughout. Early's men are very active on that first day. Edward Johnson's troops are part of Jubal Early's who fought at Payne's Farm. On the retreat, the flanking movement, I don't remember anything. Frank's nodding no too. Yes, Bob.
Bob Luckerbill from Friends of the Wilderness, and I would tag on to what Grit mentioned that we'll be out there this summer. We're also doing, we've got a 5K and a 10K run on the 8th of March onto the battlefield. It just, again, trying to create interest, trying to get folks out to this forgotten feature. And we're going to do the anniversary in November. We're going to have over 200 reenactors on the property, and we'll be adding some additional activities throughout the course of the year as we try to generate some interest. And my favorite saying about this whole battle is Frank's comment that there's no such thing as a small battle if you were in it.
Yeah, for some of the participants at Payne's Farm, they talked about that being the loudest battle that they have ever been in, and some even make references. I was at Antietam, and this was louder than that. That Antietam is the bloodiest day in American history, with all the casualties that fell that day. But yes, for the size, a very short battle with small numbers of folks involved, but really, again, the heavy casualties. Again, to lose to 10% in any fight, that's usually the gauge. If you lose more than 10%, your effectiveness is kind of knocked out. And again, both sides lost about 10% of the men engaged in that battle. That's
Can I
nothing to
tell you a
sneeze at.
story about the flag bearer?
Sure.
Well, you talked about the V that Johnson, Allegheny Johnson formed. Well, right in the crook of that V was the Stonewall Brigade. Was 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 22nd, 33rd, something over Virginia. No, 1st, 2nd, 5th, 22nd, 33rd Virginia made up the Stonewall Brigade. And Stonewall Jackson himself, of course, had died at Chancellorsville that spring, earlier that spring. And James A. Walker took over the Stonewall Brigade, and he was a pretty good general, and the troops called him Stonewall Jim.
Any relation?
No, actually not. But they came out to attack, and you gave the numbers. That didn't slow them down. They were going to go out and attack. And the Federals, with all of their firepower, blew them back into the woods. And I don't know if it was Jim Walker or one of his other officers rode out into the field, jumped the fence, rode out into the field, and yelled to the men, let's go after them, let's get them. Nobody moved. He finally gave up and jumped his horse back over the fence into the woods, bullets singing all over everywhere. And then here comes this Confederate color bearer. Climbs over the fence, walks out into the field a short distance, plants the colors in the ground, and sort of half squats, half sits beside them. And I mean, all the shooting's going on. And there's a Maryland regiment that is fairly close to where he is. And one of the Marylanders writes, and he says, great consternation in our unit. Some people were yelling, shoot him, kill him. And other people were saying, no, he's too brave. Don't hurt him. Well, after a while, and probably not a very long while, this man stands up, pulls the color staff up out of the ground, walks back to the woods and jumps over the fence. It turns out he was bucking for promotion, and he was made a lieutenant. He actually survived the war. Lived in Lexington, and people used to interview him after that.
Hey, Greg, we've got another question. Do we know anything much about the physical condition of Robert E. Lee at this time? It seems like I remember reading in Sears' book on the Wilderness Campaign that during the Mine Run effort, he was bedridden and suffering from a bout of angina. Does that ring a bell with you?
Well, Lee seemed to be in pretty good health during this. The most prominent story to stand out about Lee in this campaign, he's at the Catlett Rhodes house in New Verdiersville toward the end of this, and he is kind of hoping that the Union Army is going to attack him, but a staff officer comes in to report something and says that Lee caught him, and he said, what do you think the Union Army is going to do? And, he gives him his response. Why do you think so? And then he says, well, if they don't attack us, we must attack them, sir. And he says that Lee was in the house with a brush combing his hair. And every time he said, we must attack them, he kind of slapped his hand with that brush. He says, we must attack them, sir. And you young people, you must exert yourself. You must exert yourself, sir. So he was, at least at that phase, he was not bedridden, and he was as fully animated as you'll find Robert E. Lee. And so he seemed to be in good shape then. But you're right, Lee at several times had illnesses, either serious things like angina, or in the following spring at the North Anna River, he has an intestinal issue. It's apparently like a flu or something that doesn't last long, but there's an opportunity to attack the enemy. As we talk about opportunities, the other battle in Virginia that gets focused on a lot for missed opportunities, this is from the Confederate standpoint. Grant kind of crossed some troops across a river and left others on the other side. He actually had at one point, if this is a river, he's got some north of the river on the center, some across the river on the Confederate side on his right, and on his left he's got some across. So two portions of the Union Army dangled on either side, and there's an opportunity for the Confederates to try to destroy a third of the Union Army where the other 2/3 can't participate at all. But he had nobody that he could turn to. Hill had been disappointing, and the others at that point had not had enough experience for him to turn the army over to. So that was the other time when Lee's health was a major factor.
All right, Greg.
All right, thank you.